a lingering cough. It's really not much fun. As I mentioned with the kiddos just a few moments ago, I don't like being in the middle of saying something and then having to stop because my body decides it wants to do something totally different than I would like it to do. It doesn't seem to want to respect my own authority or dominion over myself. It wants to go do its own thing. And I'm not okay with that. In fact, I think many of us, when we don't feel all that well, get very upset with our bodies and the things that they decide to do. And as much as I would like to go off on a little tirade about how much I'm not happy with my sinuses or my throat right now, I don't think that it would be very helpful for us. So instead, I want to lift up a word from Mark's gospel, a word that gets used multiple times in this morning's gospel reading, and was also used in the reading from 1 Corinthians this morning, but we didn't hear the same word because the translators decided to use a different word to help us think about something a little bit different. But the word that I want to talk a little bit about is that word that shows up in verse 22 and then verse 27, that word being authority. Folks in the synagogue were astounded by Jesus' teaching, for he taught as one having authority. And after Jesus casts out the unclean spirit, they're asking themselves, what is this new teaching with authority? I want to have the authority over my body when I know I'm about to cough, but I don't. It's easy for us in our world to be able to point out when there seems to be that lack of authority or abuse of authority. But for some odd reason, it seems even more difficult for us to be able to see when authority is used appropriately. So I'm reflecting on something that happened in my own life when I was a teenager. A good friend of mine and I were in summer school together because we, for whatever reason, thought it would be a good idea to spend our summers in school so that we could get ahead on our classes because that seemed like a good thing to do at the time. And one particular afternoon after school was over, we were driving down Forest Preserve Drive. And my friend who was driving the car mentioned that there was a vehicle behind us that was tailgating us. And he was trying to figure out why it is that this person seemed to be in such a rush that they would be almost inches away from his bumper. And being that both of us, recently having completed driver's ed, were very mindful of the rules of the road, the instant kind of thought that came to our mind was, well, slow down and let them pass. So that's what my friend Tom did. We slowed down and slowed down and slowed down. And on Forest Preserve Drive, which at one point I believe the maximum speed limit is 45 miles an hour, folks start to notice when you're going particularly slow. While we get to the next stoplight after this person we notice has been tailgating my friend Tom as we're driving, and we're sitting at the stoplight waiting for the light to change, and all of a sudden, Tom sees in the driver's side mirror that the person behind us has decided to get out of their vehicle and is now walking towards the driver's side of the car. And Tom said something that I will not repeat, but certainly was wondering what was going on, and lo and behold, here was a rather tall, rather well-dressed police officer who wanted Tom's driver's license, insurance, and registration. And Tom, of course, willingly obliging, trying to figure out what was going on, shows the stuff to the officer, and the officer says, "Do you know what you are doing?" And Tom's like, "No, I don't know what I was doing. What was I doing?" It's like, "You're impeding the flow of traffic. You're driving so slow that you're preventing us from being able to get to where we're trying to go." And then Tom, looking at the officer's uniform, decided to be a little smart alecky. You know how high school students can be that way sometimes? Well, he asked what it was that this police officer wanted to do with him and us and his driver's license, insurance, and registration when, you see, the officer wasn't a Chicago police officer. In fact, we happened to have been, as I said, driving on Forest Preserve Drive. And if you know your geography, Forest Preserve Drive leaves Dunning, which is in Chicago, but then travels north to one of the few suburbs that is surrounded by the city of Chicago. And this officer wasn't even from that suburb. No, he was from a certain park district that was another suburb south of Dunning. So while Tom's question was correct, what do you want to do with us because we're outside of your jurisdiction, it was enough to get this officer who was upset about Tom going awfully slow, mad enough to throw the stuff back in his face, the driver's license, proof of insurance, and the registration, and a firm warning of, "Get out of here." Now, we could argue and debate about which person was abusing authority or how that all works, but in the end, it doesn't really help us out much. See, the fact of the matter was, something happened. There was a power struggle between two individuals, and neither of them ended up accomplishing anything that I think that they were hoping to accomplish in that entire exchange. And now I'm sure you're wondering, what does this have to do with the Gospel of Mark? Well, it has everything to do with the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus shows up in Capernaum and goes into the synagogue on that Sabbath day, he takes a position within the synagogue and begins to teach. He starts speaking as if he has the authority to be the teacher in that space, and folks take notice. They start to ask, what is going on, and why is it that this person's teaching is so important? Why is it that this person speaks in such a manner that we should be paying attention, and why is it that they feel they have the power or the authority to do so? And then to further complicate things, a person with an unclean spirit decides to speak out, to rabble-rouse about it, to ask, what is it that you want to have with us? Have you come to destroy us? In Jesus, realizing that the only person in the entire assembly who recognizes who he is decides to say, enough. Be silent. Leave him alone. Jesus speaks with authority in the moment and casts out the unclean spirit. And you'd think that these folks in Capernaum who have gathered at synagogue to hear the good news, to hear the story of God active in the world, you think that they'd stop and notice. You think that they'd be able to see Jesus as who he is, as the one he was described as by the man with the unclean spirit. But they don't. And just like they're not able to see Jesus, I can't find my voice. Whose authority? Whose power is it that is being wielded? What is this teaching with authority? The people in the synagogue, they can't see past their own constructs of what authority is, because in their minds, Jesus has the authority to cast out an unclean spirit. And why would they want to be with someone who has the power over that? Why would they want to be with someone who's able someone who's able to interact with something that was unwanted? And just as much as I want to be able to speak in a loud, booming voice talking about what God is doing, I recognize that I need to stop, because if I'm not able to gain authority over my own body, then how am I supposed to be able to gain authority over anything else that I try to do? Maybe, just maybe, Jesus is trying to get me to recognize, trying to get us to recognize that sometimes the real authority in this world isn't from something in this world at all, but a spirit that's far greater than any of us. It's far more powerful, far more controlled than any of us, and is willing to break down those conceptions and misconceptions that we allow to get in the way. Thanks be to God. Amen.